Back on the MSG 150 at home, presented by Chase, Bill Pito, Alan Hahn, and look who it is. Kenny Albert, our pal, our colleague, who at last count has not called a game in 104 straight days, by far a career record. The question is, Kenny, are you still married?
I am still married, Bill. It's been 104 straight days at home, like you said, and everybody's getting along. We've spent a lot of family time, which has certainly been one of the positives during this pause, but it's hard to believe that it's been that long since the Rangers Avalanche game on March 11th, which was the last game that I worked.
Are you coming out of hibernation going to jump into all the sport? All the sports are going to be playing at one time when we do get into the month of August, which we've never seen it before like that, where everybody's actually playing games. So if you had to pick, which is the one that you're looking forward to the most? Loaded question, Kenny.
Well, let's hope, Alan, that they're all playing in August. That's the plan as of now, and we'll keep our fingers crossed. And obviously, the health and safety of everybody involved is the foremost thought for all of us. But how great would that be if everything does come back simultaneously? In normal years, up until 2020, October has been the only time when the four major sports are running concurrently. It's the NFL regular season, of course, the NHL, NBA preseason, and baseball playoffs. And I've been very fortunate to have a couple of stretches where I've been involved in all four during 7 or 8 days during the month of October. But that could happen this August or September. Let's hope.
And Kenny, obviously we're not going to see any fans here when these sports restart. What's your take on what might be the best sport with no fans in terms of the viewer and those of us who are going to be watching all of these events on television?
Well, that's a great question, Bill. And we've all watched some of the golf and European soccer and Korean baseball and NASCAR that have been on television recently with no fans or limited fans. We always hear that football is probably the best television sport. And I once heard a crazy nugget that apparently, each team has only 8 home games, and NFL teams are located in, 31 different cities, so many areas of the country where people don't live near an NFL stadium. I've heard that 90 to 95% of NFL fans have never been to a game. So most of them only watch on TV anyway during normal times. So, and when you look at the ratings, obviously footballs are higher than the other three. But as far as basketball and hockey and baseball, I think it could be so exciting, and I think it will certainly be different without fans in the stadium. I know there's been talk about piping in crowd noise either into the arenas and stadiums or over the TV broadcast. I also think that some of the sports, basketball and hockey in particular, we may see some really creative camera angles that we're not used to, because they will be able to put the cameras where the fans usually are. There are only certain places they can normally place cameras, the various networks in the stadiums and arenas. And I know they've done it with the golf and with NASCAR in particular, but we could see some really creative camera angles and some audio that we're not used to with no fans in the arenas.
And when you talk about sports and crowd noise, obviously with playoffs, the energy of the crowd is always so important. We were joking last week talking about the U.S. Open, and how, what do they say before a serve? But quiet, please, right? So you really don't want fan interaction. NFL's the other story. What does a quarterback do sometimes on a drive late in the game? He goes like this. He puts his arms, everybody, be quiet, be quiet. So everybody on the line can hear his cadence and the count and the play. So, the NFL one's going to be interesting because you still have a lot of people on both sidelines. Players can certainly make their own noise field level. But the other thing that could be exciting, Kenny, and you being courtside a lot of times, not necessarily hockey and football, of course, and baseball, but at least for basketball, there's a lot of talking that goes on between players that if they're willing to be mic'd up, it could make it for real. Never mind the camera angles. Just how about some of the interaction that we'll be more privy to watching on TV?
Right. We heard Tiger and Phil and Tom Brady and Peyton Manning and all of their conversations during the golf match a couple of weeks ago. And like you said, Alan, when you're courtside at an NBA game, there's so much chatter that goes on. I think the general public would be shocked at how much talk goes on a hockey rink. And you played hockey, your kids play hockey. No one really sits courtside. There's boards and glass, so you don't really hear it. whether you're a fan or a media member. But when you're at an NHL practice, for example, or a morning skate, there's a lot of talk that goes on, communication between the goalie and his defenseman. And when someone's calling for a pass, there's a lot more talk than you would expect. So we may hear some of that once the NHL does come back without fans. And you're right, Alan, about football. When the quarterback's asking for quiet, when the crowd's going crazy, when the visiting team is on offense. In hockey, there are a couple of things, regarding home ice advantage. One of them is crowd and crowd noise, and the other one is the last change. The home team gets the last change. So even though all of the games will be in two hub cities, whichever team is designated as the home team is still going to be so important due to that last change.
Great point.
Kenny, how about your approach as an announcer calling these games with no fans in the stands?
Well, I think a lot of the broadcast issues, Bill, some of it is still undetermined. Obviously, I would love to be in the stadium and the arenas. You feed off the energy normally. I always joke that my hearing is not going to be very good in about 10 or 15 years because I always keep what's called the effects, the crowd noise, the ambiance in the arenas and stadiums. I always keep it pretty loud in my headset because I feed off that. I don't want to feel like I'm working in a phone booth when I'm calling a game. You want to feed off the energy of the fans. If we are in the arenas and stadiums, you're not going to have that. Maybe they'll pipe it in. You might have to, form your own energy at times. But another aspect of it is at the beginning, and hopefully not for too long, there's a good possibility that a lot of us will be calling games from a studio and not from the actual arena or stadium, which is definitely a lot more challenging. Sometimes the monitors aren't that big. You might have trouble seeing the numbers. In hockey, for example, the referee could have his hand up 50 feet behind the play to call a penalty, and we might not be able to see that on the screen. So there are definite challenges. I understand why we might do it that way initially, to cut down on traveling and being around X number of people. But hopefully, if that's the case, it doesn't last for too long.
I was joking with some of your colleagues, Mike Breen, Michael Kay, about being, whether it's courtside or in an empty stadium, and making their signature calls. Mike Breen yells bang, and then the other player hits a shot. He doesn't get a bang. Does he turn? Because now you hear everything. It's like, what? I don't get a bang for that? Or, with Michael Kay's signature call is see ya. And if I'm the opposing pitcher, I can hear that now. And I might look up and say, I'll see you later. Like there's always going to be that kind of element. And I'm sure if you're going to be in the building calling the game, that stuff can't get into your head, but it could make it for a much different experience as a broadcaster.
I've actually thought about that, Alan. The NBA broadcasters, if in fact they are in Orlando, even if they're not courtside, if they're 5 or 10 rows up, the building is going to be pretty empty. The players are going to hear everything. If the analyst is criticizing a player or a coach, they'll hear it. Even at hockey arenas, when we're all the way upstairs at the Garden on the Chase Bridge, if it's an empty building, they might hear the play-by-play down on the ice. So that could lead to some pretty funny situations. I mean, I'm cognizant of it sometimes. If I'm with Clyde or Wally calling a Knicks game on the road, we're down on the floor, usually on the same side as the benches. At the Garden, we're across from the benches. So on the road, oftentimes players who are waiting to check into the game are sitting right in front of us at the table. Coaches wander by, officials. And there are times when it's quiet during free throws, for example, when they probably hear, they might tune it out and not really pay attention, but they could certainly hear what we're saying.
Yeah, I'd get a timeout right here. And have the coach turn around and say, I don't have one.
Kenny, before we let you go, your thoughts on the NHL plans for a restart, and specifically the Rangers and the Carolina Hurricanes in that qualifying series?
Well, I think the NHL's done a great job putting out the plan to the public about a month ago. And they've always mentioned that the dates are tentative. They could change, they could slide depending on what the health officials and the scientists and the doctors that they consult with are telling them. But I like the fact that they included 24 teams, not just from a Ranger standpoint, but because there were a number of teams within 2 or 3 or 4 points when the season went on pause on March 12th, and they still had 10 or 11 games left, certainly enough time to get into the top 8 in each conference. So I think it'll be very exciting. The Rangers had great success against Carolina. They were 4-0 this year against the Hurricanes. Will that carry over or translate? Who knows? All of the players, all of the coaches, all of the teams have never been in this situation where they basically went 2.5, 3 months without skating at all. And then you have a brief training camp, and then you get into a playoff situation. You don't really ease your way into the regular season. All of a sudden it's playoffs. And the best of 5 series in the play-in round is reminiscent. I know Bill and Alan and I were all around the same age. Alan might be a couple of years younger, but we certainly remember the late 70s and early 80s when the first round of the NHL playoffs was either best 2 out of 3 or best 3 out of 5. And these were quick series. They played back-to-back days. They might play 2 games in one city, 1 off day, and then 2 games in the other city. The other thing, and I know the Islanders coach Barry Trotz touched on this in an interview a couple of weeks ago, it's going to be a little bit different for these teams and players not having to travel. They're so used to the routine of playing a game, getting on a plane. They're going to be in the same city if they advance deep into the playoffs, perhaps for 2 months or longer than 2 months. So that's going to be different for sure, not traveling and actually getting to bed at a normal time after a game.
All right, Kenny. Hey, so great to see you. Hopefully your record for consecutive days without calling a game will end very soon. Great to see you. Hopefully we'll see you in person soon.
Well, it's 104 and counting. I've loved watching you guys and all of the classic games, Knicks and Rangers on MSG. So hope to see you both in person soon.
All right, up next here on the MSG 150 at Home presented by Chase, we'll take you back to the 99 playoffs for the Knicks and why the first round against the Heat was so significant. We'll discuss after this.